Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Johngy OR Else Podcast, without which life would be incomplete and have little or no meaning. I am your host, who else but Tommy Else, and with me, as always, is the man on the beat from JohnG'sBeat.com, Mr. Jonathan Xavier Robleski. John, how are you?
Well, let the record show that this is your second attempt. The first one you butchered, so of course you're editing it, so you might actually cut this part out too. But I know.
Perhaps.
I'm good. How are you, Tommy?
I'm okay. I don't know that I know your middle name. What is your middle name?
Well, first of all, it's not Jonathan.
You're just John.
I am just John. It's good enough. And my middle name is actually Francis. But if you watched was it Stripes? Yeah. Nobody calls me Francis. You call me Francis, I kill you.
Yeah, I remember.
But I do have a bone to pick with you about your introductions. When I was doing the introduction, you said, just get to the point, just do this, no frills, because that's what it goes off. And then you went off on this tangent of without this, life would be incomplete.
No, see, that's not a tangent. That's just stating data. That's facts. That's just, I'm letting people know, like, if you are hearing this show for the first time, I'm giving you a frame of, where we're coming from here. I'm setting the scene. I'm laying the base,
Yeah, you're laying it.
But none of that is important, because we have a groundbreaking event on today's show, because this is the first time in the history of this show that we have ever brought a guest back for a second round. Not that we wouldn't have past guests back on, and hopefully we will have some of our past guests back on, but we spoke to him not too long ago, Mr. Chris Bournea, who directed an independent documentary on Black women wrestlers in the 50s and 60s, and it's called Lady Wrestler. It's available on Amazon. And we had interviewed him before, and when we had interviewed him the first time, we hadn't actually seen the documentary yet, but we were intrigued about it, which is why we talked to him in the first place. And then after talking to him, we were really intrigued by the whole thing, and so we decided to set up a time, and we got together, and we had some turkey chili that I made, which met with high acclaim. Am I right?
It did. Yes. It did. It was fantastic.
And we watched the documentary,
and which was also fantastic.
It was very fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I was immediately sending the link to people that I know, that I was like, you gotta check this out. This is totally worth the time. It's great. But along the way, you and I also we had questions about different aspects of the film and everything, and so we reached back out to Mr. Bournea and asked him if he'd be willing to spare a little more time and sit down and talk with us again, and he was, and we had a lovely conversation with him. So without further ado, welcome back to the show, Mr. Chris Bournea.
For the Johngy OR Else Podcast, we're proud to welcome into our studios filmmaker Chris Bournea.
Chris,
hi guys.
How you doing?
Thanks for having me back. Great to be here.
Thanks for being here.
You are the first guest in the history of this podcast that has been back for a second time.
Wow, real honor.
And not only a second time, but within a week of us interviewing you the first time.
Wow. I'm like gas, right? I'm gone. I come
back. So when we talked to you last, we got to hear about everything that you had done to come up with the documentary you did, Lady Wrestler, and John and I were. We were intrigued in the first place, which is why we had gotten in touch with you and interviewed you the first time. But then after talking to you and hearing even more about it from your perspective, it really seriously piqued our interest. And so we booked a date. John came over. I made some chili, and we sat down and
gas, huh?
Yeah. And yeah, we sat down and we watched it, and I really loved it. And I posted it on my social media and told people I was like, because I know so many wrestlers just different ages, different races, different genders and everything. And I think every single one of them could benefit from knowing this piece of history. I just thought it was incredibly fascinating. I loved seeing the interviews with the actual women who were there. And like, that's gold. To be able to have that documented is just gold.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the women that you interviewed were just fantastic. So they were so full of personality.
Yeah, they were fun. Yeah, they were all fun. Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, it was definitely my goal was to kind of record their oral history while they were, still with us.
Yeah, and you did a great job of getting their personalities across and just kind of letting them be them, and and everything. And I'm glad that you were able to catch them while they were with us still and everything, because as I was telling people about it, I was telling them, I'm like, he's got interviews with the actual women that he's speaking about and everything. And a lot of people were surprised, but yeah, it was a huge part. So, but we did have some questions about some stuff that we wanted to run past you, just to kind of get a little deeper into it, since we do have the ear of the man himself here. So one of the first things I noticed is that the film was shot in, like a 4x4 kind of format. Now, was that because most of the footage that you were going to have from the archive stuff, like, was that, or was that a decision you made for another reason?
It's purely because of technology. So when I was shooting the interviews with the women, the technology that I was using at the time was digital video, the mini, almost like mini VHS cassettes. So that was a challenge of completing the documentary, as technology kept evolving and changing while I was shooting. So, nowadays you can shoot on the, small little SD cards that, in 4K if you want to, and everything is, high definition. But I was dealing with the technology at the time, and I didn't want to go back and, because I started shooting it in the mid 00s and finished it in the teens. So I didn't want to go back at some point and have all the footage look different, because I was filming newer interviews with, high definition, newer technology. So when you, they call it rendering, when you render the final product, the modern technology will interpret older footage that's shot with older technology as being in the format you described. Like if you look at a movie that's from the 50s or 60s, even if you watch it on Amazon Prime or especially YouTube, it'll have the little box, around it.
Oh yeah, because otherwise it's just stretching out an existing image. Yeah.
I thought it worked well though. I thought
it gave it a uniqueness for sure. But I was wondering, I was wondering, like, if it was a technical thing or if it was an artistic decision. So
no, it just, I mean, like John said, maybe it gives it that retro feel, and that's. It goes with the theme of, the women, their heyday was the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, for sure. I was very curious about you had a gentleman on there who was a wrestling fan from Detroit. Who you
Kenny
would check,
Clark,
who you checked in with a lot. Now, what exactly, how did you hook up with him, and what's his background? Like, why did you go to him to interview him for all of this?
So Kenneth contacted me when the original article in the Columbus Dispatch came out, and he had been a longtime fan of Ethel Johnson and her sisters Babs and Marva. And he actually emailed me, this was back in 2006, and asked me if I could introduce him to Ethel, because I had interviewed her for the article. And I just said, well, I can't guarantee her availability.
Sure.
But I just started working on a documentary about, Ethel and women like her. And, since you were a fan and you witnessed their popularity in real time, would you be interested in commenting? And Kenny is actually an actor in addition to being a wrestling fan. So he has a lot of wrestling memorabilia. So he's sort of like a, informal wrestling historian. So he had, met Ethel and her sisters when he was a teenager, when they came to wrestle at venues in Detroit. So I just thought his perspective from the fan, especially being a male fan, and giving the perspective of, I'm a man, not to be offensive, but a straight man who appreciates,
Yeah.
women's sports. I just thought that was an interesting perspective.
And back then, yeah, especially that was not common at all. I mean, women's sports was a rarity to begin with, but to get a guy who's a fan of it and could appreciate it, and appreciate what women were having to add to it, and the extra effort that they had to put in over the men. Yeah. That's good. Okay, well that answers that one.
Well, along those same lines, you had my guy, you had Roddy Piper in there.
Yeah.
How did that come to be? Like, did you know that Roddy was a fan of women wrestling, or did that come out in a conversation you had with him?
Well, I'll give you the condensed, or I'll try to give you the condensed version of a long story of how that interview with Roddy Piper came about. So I was a fan of his when I was a kid. I used to watch the WTF, I guess, at that time in the early 80s, when it was on WTBS. So I'm a fan of all different kinds of music, including heavy metal. And I just happened to be looking on Lita Ford's website and saw that she was going to be at this horror conference called Days of the Dead in Indianapolis, which is like a 4-hour drive from Columbus. And I was like, oh, I'm a huge Lita Ford fan. I would love to meet her. And then I kind of scrolled down the website and saw, oh, Roddy Piper's going to be there. I wonder if I could just kill two birds with one stone, take my camera and ask if he'd be willing to be interviewed.
There's a good chance that John was at that day.
I was absolutely at that one.
Wow.
Yeah,
this was July of 2013, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
John,
what a small world.
Yeah. John
I've covered that convention. Yeah.
Yeah. John has been covering Days of the Dead for as long as I've known him. So I'm sure he was probably in the building with you. So
yeah, that is so cool. So, Roddy Piper was there for the cast reunion of They Live. And so I just got in line in his booth. And when I got to the front of the line, I said, hey, I explained the project to him. And he said, oh, yeah, I remember those women. Why don't you come back tomorrow on Sunday when the line has died down? And there'll be less people. So I actually had an event in Columbus. I had to drive all the way back to Columbus and then drive all the way back to Indianapolis the next day. And he kept me waiting. Though. He kept me waiting for hours and hours. And and I can say this now, God rest his soul, because I'm not defaming anyone. Yeah. His publicist came up to me and said, just between you and me, he's sleeping off a hangover. But when he finally came down, he was just so cool and so accessible, and he's not someone that you would think would be, you would associate with feminism. But I mean, he was just had so much respect for these women wrestlers in general, but especially for the Black women, and had known Ramona and recalled an incident where they were hanging out in a bar in Montreal, because he's Canadian and speaks French. He actually stopped the guy from hitting on Ramona, even though she was perfectly capable of standing up for herself.
Sure, yeah.
But he was just so cool and so accessible, and yeah, he was great to talk to.
Well, that's really nice.
Did you get to meet Lita? Did you get to meet Lita?
I did. Yes, and she was very gracious in telling me, I would love to take a picture with you, but there's a fee. So I had to go run to an ATM and pay the fee to get her autograph and take a picture with her. But she was cool.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's really cool about Piper, though. I'm not wildly surprised to hear that. I mean, he's always been a very big proponent of just, the wrestling industry in general, and he has backed up a lot of women in the past. But even from his generation to still, I mean, because their generation is like probably 2 generations before him at least. So
yeah,
so for him to even, be aware and have an appreciation and understanding of it and everything is cool. And to be able to tap into that, it's an awesome insight to be able to get. So it was really cool to get the clips of Piper in there talking.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, in terms of, we're not asking for a specific pay. I don't even know if you would know a specific pay, but how did their pay scale fare in comparison to like the more famous white women, I guess? Because a lot of them, it seemed like, they had day jobs as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, from what I could glean, was their pay was anywhere from like $50 to $500 per match. And I think, Ethel, since she was married, she didn't have a day job, and wrestling was her full-time, her full-time gig. But Ramona, I think Ramona Isbell came in and out. It was like, I think she even said that in the documentary, like she would get tired. She called it the life. I would get tired of the life and go get a real job, quote unquote. And then Marva Scott, Ethel Johnson's younger sister, after she had that experience in Japan, you know, where they threatened to throw her out of a skyscraper window, she had a mental breakdown.
That was it then.
Well, it wasn't completely it, because she would go and wrestle on weekends and stuff sometime.
Okay.
But she was like, I can't keep doing this full time. It's just too stressful. I have kids to support. So that's when she became a youth counselor. Well, and I was actually hoping I could find one of the boys she counseled and like talk about, you know, what kind of difference she made in her life. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to like track anyone down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounded like an extremely traumatic experience. Regardless, it'd be enough to make anybody say, I'm out. You know?
Well, look at Simone Biles and all the athletes nowadays who like saying, you know, self-care, you know, I'm going to withdraw from the Olympics because I need to work on my mental health. That was not an issue. I mean, that was not an option back then.
No.
Right.
You either, you know, went on or you didn't get paid.
Right.
You didn't have a whole bunch of like, you know, corporate sponsors backing you that you could fall back on that sponsorship income or whatever. So
and it wasn't like just every wrestling league was taking in black women wrestlers either, you know. So
exactly.
Tommy.
John.
No, I thought you had a question.
No, I was leaving it open for you there, buddy.
Okay. You said you're in process of doing a I don't know if it's a sequel or another chapter of it. Have you given any thought to discussing, trying to get opinions from more recent wrestlers, perhaps even active?
Yeah, I think that would be great, because what I found was that a lot of the more recent wrestlers were not aware of these women either. Like, I did a podcast series to, you know, coincide with the release of Lady Wrestler, and I interviewed Trish Adora and a couple of other more recent wrestlers, and they seemed like they were just as surprised about these women as I was. So, and I remember one time I posted a vintage clip from Jet Magazine on Twitter, and like several wrestlers were like, "Oh my God, these women were in Jet Magazine. I didn't even know they existed, let alone they were in mainstream media." Yeah, mainstream black media. But so it would be interesting to get the perspective of current wrestlers about what they think about these women and their legacy.
Yeah, whether they're in the in the big leagues or they're on the independents or whatever. I mean, it was one of the reasons why, like, when I posted it on Facebook and on Twitter and stuff, but it was just I just was like, man, I can't think of any wrestlers that I know that wouldn't be interested in this, that wouldn't be like blown away. The guy who was my trainer, I sent it to him right away. He and his girlfriend are obviously both workers, and I said, you guys need to sit down and watch this. I'm like, this is seriously an awesome story that just nobody, I don't think, not enough people know about it, and I'm surprised that it doesn't get it hasn't been dug up by anyone else, you know, and thankfully you did, you know, and brought it to light. So I hope that this thing really spreads and gets out there. And if you do follow up with, because you said the next one might be just more focused on one particular one. I don't remember which one.
One woman that I've been communicating with is Kathleen Wembley, because she was a contemporary of Ethel and her sister. She knew them, and they grew up sort of in the same area. So her story, even though she sort of came in at the same time into Billy Wolf's wrestling organization at the same time, her experience was different. She wasn't marketed just strictly as a quote unquote Negro wrestler. She had more of she was marketed as kind of having a broader appeal. And then she moved to New York, you know, and was married to Bobo Brazil. So she has a whole different experience than the Wingo sisters had.
Sure. So one of the things I noticed, so my parents were both competitive bodybuilders, and I grew up around that world. And when I was growing up, a lot of people in general were, for lack of a better word, they were grossed out by women who were muscular and everything. And while there are some pretty muscular women in like the WWE and AEW now, I was pretty impressed with the physiques on all of these women in the documentary. And I know that they were trying to show strength, but also be sexy at the same time.
Right.
Do you have any insight, or do you know about how they were perceived, just like, you know, in a day-to-day basis by men and stuff like that? Like, were they considered attractive? Was it intimidating because some guys are just straight up intimidated by a woman who's, you know, got some muscularity to her or something like that. I mean, how, you know, how they were perceived in that way?
Yeah, well, you know, as Jeff Lean, the author who wrote the biography of Mildred Burke, explained, is like Billy Wolf and Mildred had that sex, muscles, and diamonds formula. So
right.
they
and she was really
oh, she was ripped. Mildred Burke.
Yeah, when she first showed up on the screen, I was like, damn. I'm like, she's
yeah. Yeah, but Billy Wolf, you know, had the women, you know, when they were outside of the ring, they had to wear dresses. They had to, you know, basically dress up like Hollywood starlets. And in the Black community, you know, it's a little more acceptable to be a little more fuller figured. So like Babs had more of a fuller figure, whereas Ethel was shorter and a little more muscular and taut. And their younger sister Marva was kind of curvy, and Ramona Isbell was very curvaceous. I mean, she was strong and athletic, but I mean, if you look at her wrestling publicity shot, I mean, you would not know that was not an actress. I mean,
sure, yeah.
So I mean, I think they were perceived as being athletic but being sexy, because they, you know, Ethel was probably the most muscular of her three sisters, but even with her, you know, she had that glamorous image, and, you know, as she said, she kept her weight down, so she wasn't real bulky. She was very muscular, but more of like an Angela Bassett kind of.
I mean, like I thought they all looked great and everything, but see, I also never thought, you know, I guess maybe because like I said, I grew up around it. To me, it wasn't inordinate to see a woman who had a physique on her, you know. So, you know,
was there any attempts to capitalize on that in terms of either Hollywood or modeling, or was that just not done at that era?
You mean for the women to sort of go into modeling or acting,
branch out a little bit? Yeah.
Well, you know, Mildred, after she divorced Billy in the, I want to say 50s, she moved to Los Angeles and she opened her own wrestling management business. So I don't know if her reason for moving to Los Angeles was she had that idea that, you know, I can help break these women into acting and modeling. They never really happened. You know, it wasn't like, you know, the 80s when Rowdy Piper could be in They Live, and it was just sort of like accepted that, and especially now, social media influencers can be actors or be
they'll let anybody at this point.
Yeah, so sure. I mean, they were on like game shows and stuff, but as far as like acting or like fashion modeling, that wasn't really there wasn't really much crossover. And even if you see that there was like actors were actors, models were models. Sure. You didn't see actors on the cover of fashion magazines the way you do now.
Yeah, just in general, there wasn't like, a lot of crossover.
It was more siloed. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, no. It just wasn't a lot of crossover in general, no matter what. So that makes sense. Yeah. Right. That's true. I guess we kind of take that for granted because now, like, you have rock stars with reality shows, and
everybody does everything now.
You know, like the Foo Fighters made a movie. You know, it's so, you know, it's stuff like that. So
well, it was even so strict that TV actors didn't do movies. Models didn't cross over into acting unless they stopped modeling. You know, it was just very, very. Everybody had their own lane and stuck to it.
Makes sense.
I mean, even silent film actors didn't become voice actors. It was like you do one thing, you specialize in one thing, and that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, it makes total sense.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Tommy, anything?
I'm good, John. You got anything else?
I am good, man. We do want to wrap up by saying that, you know, again, thoroughly enjoyed the documentary. I mean, I learned, as Tommy said, that's a piece of history, sports history, you know, that I didn't even know existed. And watching it, I was fascinated. I know Tommy was fascinated. We were both sitting there, and afterwards we talked for about an hour. just
Yeah.
about it. And we were thinking of random questions we wanted to ask you. We appreciate you coming on. We highly encourage anybody to check it out. You don't have to be a wrestling fan. You don't have to support any particular cause. It's historical. It's important for everybody.
Yeah. It was very well done. And again, thank you for doing it and bringing it to light. And we will definitely be, looking to see if you do anything in the future. We'll be on it. We'll be all over it. And then we'll have you back and we'll do this again. Drag
don't hesitate to reach out with updates.
Drag you back on here. So
absolutely. I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
You. All right, buddy. You be well and keep it up. And hopefully we'll see you down the road.
Will do. Thanks again.
All right.
Thanks, Chris. Have a good night, buddy.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, there you go. That's Mr. Chris Bournea. And it was excellent to have him back on the show. I really appreciate him taking the time to talk to us. And
totally. That was totally cool that he came back on and answered some of our follow-up questions.
Yeah, I mean, he had good answers for all of our questions. We didn't have a lot, but we had a few things we wanted to find out about.
Yeah, things come up in the doc.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And he's he's a very nice guy, a very affable dude. And like I said, if he, works on something else or for any old reason, would be happy to have him back on a third time, But if he, but I will be looking to see if he follows through on doing another documentary of anything, really, whatever.
I'm betting this is not the last we've heard of Chris Bournea.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we were here at the beginning to see where things go. So, but thank you again to him for coming on the show and sharing some more insight onto the project he did so wonderfully.
I do want to emphasize that I know we've talked about it in the interview, but I do want to emphasize you don't have to be a wrestling fan to enjoy this documentary. It's so historical. It's even beyond the history element, even behind the wrestling element. Just seeing those women were so full of life. They were so entertaining.
Yeah. No, it was very fun to watch. They're talking about some pretty hard times and some difficult stuff, but they're doing it and with a smile on their face and laughter and
positive.
Being able to laugh at the absurdity of the things that they had to deal with back then, and how the world has changed in some ways, at least. And I agree 100%. It was like infectious. Like you could feel the energy, and you could tell that it would be fun to be in a room with them and talking with them. So
good word, infectious. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, John, I think we've had a good episode. I think it's been very upbeat and positive, aside from the few shots you took at me in the beginning. So I thought maybe we'll just try to close this out on a high note and with smiles and infectious positivity ourselves. So, John, let me ask you a question real quick before we go. Let's say somebody wants to see the 316th best nugget of social media or whatever the hell your website is called, and wants to see some top tier reporting with celebrities and sports people and actors and actresses and then wrestlers and everybody from under the sun. Where on social media could somebody find such premium content?
Well, the site to which you referred would be my site, johngsbeat.com. But they can also find me anywhere on social media at johngsbeat. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, same thing, at johngsbeat. YouTube, which this interview will be on YouTube at some point soon, also johngsbeat. And more importantly, my dear friend, on another note of positivity, where could people find you, sir?
Well, I too can be found on Twitter and the gram at Tommy.
I like that.
Tommy _else. I have also revamped my YouTube page, which you can find on YouTube at /the T3 universe, all one word. it's pretty much full up at this point as far as my material I'm putting up there. I've got all my wrestling videos on there that I'm going to share with people, at least. There's a few.
Lots of Johngy's Beat stuff on there.
There's a lot of Johngy's Beat stuff on there. There'll probably be some more added at some point. There's a few matches I left off, some B-sides that I didn't think that the world needed to watch again. But but generally speaking, you're talking about 70 plus wrestling videos on there, plus live music and other miscellaneous things. So they can check that out for countless hours of quality entertainment. So that being said, for the Johngy OR Else podcast, I have been your host. Who else but Tommy Else? With me, as always, is the man on the beat from johngysbeat.com,
Mr. John Robleski.
We'll see you next time.